How many times in the past week have you argued on WhatsApp, thinking you were 100% right, ignored useful advice because you already knew, judged someone without understanding the full story? If the answer is more than once, you might be a victim of the same mechanism that destroys careers, relationships, and even democracies. It's not a lack of IQ, it's a bug in your mind. Science calls it the Dunning-Kruger Effect, and it makes people with minimal skills feel like geniuses. Experts underestimate their knowledge and causes you to repeat old mistakes as if they were new truths. The worst part? The less you know about a subject, the more invincible you feel. It's like driving drunk without realizing you're drunk. But today, you'll discover why your brain lies to you about your own knowledge, how to escape this trap before it's too late, and the secret true experts use to avoid this mistake. In 1999, two psychologists from Cornell University, David Dunning and Justin Kruger, conducted a series of experiments that would forever change the way we understand ignorance. They administered tests on logic, grammar, and humor to various groups of people, and the result was both comical and alarming. The participants with the worst performance were precisely the ones who most overestimated their abilities. The most curious part, the least competent, had no idea of their own ineptitude. In their minds, they were above average and with conviction. The most capable, on the other hand, tended to underestimate their performance. The explanation, an almost total absence of metacognition, the ability to accurately assess one's own knowledge. Imagine someone who knows nothing about physics trying to explain how the universe works. Not only do they get it wrong, but they don't even realize they're wrong. That's the core of the Dunning-Kruger effect. Ignorance of one's own ignorance. We're not just talking about a curious psychological detail. This illusion has real consequences. On social media, it turns into legions of WhatsApp experts. People who comment on politics, science, health, and philosophy with the confidence of a PhD, but with the foundation of shallow guesswork. In companies, it results in unprepared leaders making disastrous decisions. In daily life, it creates conflicts, because people with little listening and big egos take control of conversations, groups, and ideas. The most tragic part: those who need to learn the most are often the ones who see that need the least. It's almost ironic. The human mind, capable of such grand achievements, also harbors traps that lead us to believe in things that simply aren't true. One of them is the illusion of competence, a cognitive distortion that occurs when someone believes they know more than they actually do. And this illusion arises precisely from the lack of ability to recognize one's own incompetence. In other words, the less a person knows, the less they know that they don't know. This happens because the same set of skills needed to perform a task competently is, in part, the same required to evaluate whether that task was well executed. Without these skills, the brain simply lacks internal parameters to measure its own ignorance. The result? An overconfidence disconnected from reality. This is a problem of metacognition, the ability to think about one's own thinking. It's what allows us to reflect on what we know, recognize our limitations, and correct our mistakes. But when this function is compromised, the mind creates shortcuts, and mental shortcuts, while fast, are dangerously inaccurate. You've seen this in action. Just observe a reckless driver who believes they drive better than everyone else, even while racking up tickets. Or someone in an online debate who, without any serious reading on the subject, insists they're right based on intuition or personal opinion. Or the person who spreads fake news with the confidence of someone who owns the truth. These examples are symptoms of a global phenomenon. A world where baseless opinion is worth as much as a well-evidenced argument, and where noise is louder than listening. While the less competent live in a bubble of self-confidence, the more competent often struggle with doubt. It's the other side of the Dunning-Kruger effect, and perhaps even more cruel. The mind that knows enough to recognize its own ignorance is, paradoxically, the one that hesitates the most. This phenomenon clearly manifests in what's called imposter syndrome, a persistent feeling that, despite achievements, the person is fooling everyone and will eventually be exposed. Why does this happen? Because the more someone learns, the more they realize the vastness of what they still don't know. Awareness expands, and with it, the perception that knowledge is an ocean, and what we master is a drop. This realization, though true, can generate anxiety and excessive self-criticism. But it can also be the beginning of wisdom. Socrates, one of the greatest philosophers of antiquity, was accused of corrupting youth with dangerous ideas. And his defense was marked by a phrase that still echoes today. I know that I know nothing. But this statement wasn't a renouncement of knowledge. It was a radical form of intellectual honesty. Socrates knew that true wisdom doesn't lie in accumulating certainties, but in cultivating the awareness that we are always in process of learning, unlearning, and relearning. People more aware of their own ignorance tend to be more cautious, more open to dialogue, more willing to listen. And, for that very reason, they often feel out of place in a world that values loud speech over deep listening. The appearance of certainty over the sincere pursuit of truth. For the ancients, especially the Greek thinkers, the real danger wasn't ignorance itself, but ignorance disguised as knowledge. Socrates was the first to make this perception his mission. In his dialogues, he confronted politicians, craftsmen, poets, all convinced of their wisdom, and, with simple questions, exposed the emptiness behind many certainties. What he sought wasn't just to test arguments, but to provoke a crisis, a break in the automatic certainties that upheld inflated egos. This crisis, for Socrates, was the beginning of self-knowledge, and self-knowledge, in turn, was seen as the greatest of all virtues. Know thyself was a phrase that called for humility. Plato, his disciple, would continue this journey, exploring the layers of the human soul, pointing to the conflict between ignorance and knowledge, between the shadows of the cave and the light of true understanding. For him, the visible world was full of illusions, and only through reason, doubt, and sincere dialogue could one escape them. This philosophical tradition teaches something we often forget. Doubt is a form of courage. It's easier to cling to certainties, repeat what one has heard, uphold an ego full of ready-made answers. What's truly hard is to endure the insecurity of not knowing and still keep searching. When someone believes they already know enough, they stop seeking. And then, stagnation sets in almost invisibly. The Dunning-Kruger effect doesn't just affect academic debates or social media discussions. It silently undermines personal growth. If you're sure you're right, why would you listen to anyone? If you believe you're competent, why submit to new learning? The false sense of mastery creates a mental comfort zone where the person remains trapped in their own ignorance, thinking they're progressing when in fact they're going in circles. This effect spares no area. It can limit the professional who thinks they've already mastered their career and stops updating. The parent who believes they know everything about raising children and repeats toxic patterns without realizing it. The partner who thinks they understand the other but doesn't truly listen. In every case, growth stops because doubt has been banished. And where there is no doubt, there is no transformation. Self-delusion generates defensive behaviors. The person avoids criticism, ignores signs they're making mistakes, shuts themselves off in fragile certainties, but one's protected by a pride that doesn't allow for revision. And the cruelest part is that they don't realize it. Because, as we've seen, they don't know that they don't know. But there is a way out. And it begins with a simple, though difficult gesture, admitting that there may still be much to learn, that maybe the mistakes we make aren't just bad luck, but recurring perception flaws, and that they could be understood if we were open. When a person replaces the desire to seem right with genuine curiosity, they begin to break free. Humility stops being a weakness and becomes a tool. Active listening becomes a sign of intelligence. Recognizing the Dunning-Kruger effect in others is easy. The hard and most important part is identifying it in yourself, because the mind under this illusion rarely perceives how wrong it actually is. So how do you break this cycle? The first step is to cultivate constructive self-criticism. It's not about self-punishment or doubting everything, but adopting a posture of sincere inquiry. What do I really know about this subject? What are my sources? Am I listening more or just defending my point? Questions like these work like mirrors, not always pleasant, but deeply revealing. Next comes the habit of seeking honest feedback. Not from those who always agree with you, but from people who respect you enough to disagree. True growth requires confrontation, and healthy confrontation begins when we make space to be contradicted without shutting down. Another essential practice is continuous learning. Reading, studying, talking with more experienced people, exposing yourself to the unknown. All of this challenges the false sense of mastery, and especially learning from mistakes. But not automatically, reflectively. Made a mistake. Question yourself, analyze, reflect. Mistakes are not signs of failure, but opportunities to fine-tune your judgment. It's also useful to adopt more honest internal dialogue. Instead of saying "I know," try saying "I think I know, but I could be wrong." This small change in language already opens space for new ideas to enter. And more, it protects you from the pride that closes doors. And finally, a simple but powerful exercise. Look at the areas of your life where things aren't going well. It could be a worn-out relationship, a stagnant project, a recurring cycle. Ask yourself, could I be missing something important? Is my view limited by an illusion of certainty? Combating the Dunning-Kruger effect requires courage. Courage to doubt yourself, to change your mind, to recognize that the path to wisdom often begins with discomfort, but it is that discomfort that prepares the ground for real transformation. We live in an era where everyone has something to say and says it all the time. But interestingly, the more someone deepens their knowledge, the quieter they become. It's as if true wisdom carries with it a reverence for what cannot be explained in words. The wise hesitate, not for lack of answers, but because they know that the right questions are more valuable. And because they recognize that, often, speaking too much is a disguise to hide insecurity. Silence, when it comes from someone who knows, carries weight. It doesn't shout, it reveals. In Eastern philosophy, this is treated as a state of elevated consciousness. The wise speak little, observe more, listen attentively. The fool assumes it's because they have no opinion, but in reality, it's because the wise have understood that the ego loves to feed on empty certainties, and that silence is often the only honest response to the complexity of existence. Cultivating moments of inner silence can be a transformative practice. Not that empty silence, but the one that arises from deep listening to others, the world, and oneself. Wisdom, in the end, is not loud. It doesn't need to prove anything, because those who truly know don't need to look like they know. If you enjoyed this content and want to understand more about life's questions, subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone else who is also among the awakened.